that recording right now since I'm talking about it. So we're recording now, and as people arrive, I think we're going to continue to hear that little chime sound as people show up. So hopefully, I'll look into seeing if there's a way I can stop that, but I don't know if I can. So hopefully we can just sort of ignore the little boop when people show up or leave from the meeting. Okay. Yep, we've got a message in chat, which I'll respond to in just a moment. So on the topic of chat, if you do have questions, please feel free to put them into the chat window. We'll keep an eye on that and try to answer those, or I'll sort of pass those over to Annie when we have a moment. And I guess that's it. I'll help out the folks here that are having trouble connecting to audio, but I think that's all I had for housekeeping. Keep an eye out for an announcement of when the recording goes up, especially if you want to share this with someone who hasn't seen it or wasn't able to join us today. So at this point, I think I'll have Annie go ahead and kind of activate her microphone, and I will introduce her. So Annie Baumann is with Viterbo University. She has agreed to join us today to talk a little bit about her experience in working with open educational resources and sharing those out. So or trying to kind of promote those on her campus. But I don't want to talk about what she's going to talk about. I'll let her do that. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass the kind of presenter duties over to Annie and let her get started. Thank you so much, Annie, and here we go. Presenter change. All right. Annie, I think you should now have the sort of presenter mantle, so we'll just allow you to go ahead and share your screen and get going.
Can you see that? Are you seeing the PowerPoint up on your end?
No, actually, I'm not.
Okay, let me share my screen instead of just the PowerPoint.
Okay.
How's that? Is that good?
That looks great.
Great. Okay. Yeah, we don't use this one at Viterbo GoToMeeting. We've used a lot of things, but not this. So this will be my first time leading a webinar with GoToMeeting. So hopefully I can figure it out. Well, I just want to say thank you to Jeff for inviting me and the rest of the WiLS staff for inviting me to do this presentation. I'm really excited to talk about open educational resources and to talk about what we've been doing at Viterbo, and I'm happy to share some kind of practical tips or insights, and then I'd really love to open it up to questions or comments towards the end. So I'll try to keep an eye on my time for that. So I'm Annie, like Jeff said. At Viterbo, I am officially the Electronic Services and Instruction Librarian, and for this year, I am the Interim Assistant Director. I've had a lot of change in the library, so my title is getting longer. So before we get into kind of what I've been working on at Viterbo, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. There's a lot of varying degrees of understanding of what open educational resources are. So I just want to start off with a definition. So there's a couple definitions that have floated around, but many of them point back to this Hewlett Foundation definition, which states that OERs are basically teaching, learning, and research resources that are free of cost and free of access barriers. And they also carry legal permission for open use. So an open educational resource could be a lot of things. They range from open course materials, open course modules, open access textbooks, video lectures, audio lectures, anything really that could be used in the teaching and learning context that is open and free to reuse. So one of the common things that people refer to also when they talk about open educational resources is there's this continuum, a long range of what open is or what open can be. Something being free or free as like an upfront cost to a student isn't necessarily open. And people often hearken to these 5 R's of OER. So for a resource to truly be open, users must be able to make or own copies of the content. That could be a downloaded PDF or an EPUB. It could be a downloaded media file. Users must also be able to reuse that content. So once they have a copy, they must be able to share with other people. Users must be able to change or modify the content. So if the original content doesn't meet the user's needs, they can add to the content or remove pieces of the content. Users must be able to use the content to create something new, something completely different. And users must be able to share copies of the original or of any revisions of the original with anyone. So a lot of that boils down to a thing that is open for access, open to change, open for sharing, as long as attribution is given if needed. And so the Creative Commons has been really great for keeping track of these varying degrees of open. The Creative Commons creates formalized licenses that creators can apply to their work. So when you are engaging with open content or open educational resources, you know just what you're able to do and just how open something is. So to give you a little context, I think open sounds really great to librarians. The theory fits right in with what we do, but they're important for a lot of reasons outside of the library or adjacent to what we do. The cost of textbooks has increased significantly, and there's been a couple different measures, but one that I found from a report done by Student Pergs is that textbooks have increased by 73% since 2006. And so my own experience of buying textbooks as an undergrad was they were very expensive and I could hardly afford it. Now they're 73% greater in cost. And some of these textbooks can boil down to just $200 per textbook, but it really depends on the discipline. If you know a student, you know textbooks are a concern. Also, there have been various studies, and I could point to a few if you're interested, but one in Florida surveyed 22,000 students across Florida about their textbook buying behavior. And about 64% in 2012 reported not buying textbooks because they were too expensive. So students are already forking over money to attend school, and access to that crucial information is not happening because of cost or cost barrier there. If universities can remove that cost barrier, a lot of students will come in at a more equal playing field, depending on their educational background. At least if the resources are provided in the class, students should have access to what's needed to succeed. And I think the really interesting thing is, and this gets at faculty members' concern about quality, is there's been a number of studies that have reported that students do just as well in courses with open educational resources as students in same courses that use traditional textbooks. Some of these studies have found that students do a little better, but there's a lot of variables that are hard to control, and I think if we can say students do just as well, that's a really firm thing to stand on. So one of the things I think is interesting is how libraries have taken part in this. I mean, many libraries do not purchase textbooks. They are very expensive. It hasn't been our role. We don't compete with the bookstore. Bookstore has some agreements with the university, at least here, where we cannot compete. But libraries have taken a role because many of our values or our familiarity with open content lends itself to the open educational resources world. And so if you think back to the core values of the profession, like equal access to information, this seems to fit or mesh with who we are or what we do. Also, and maybe not a lot of campus groups outside of the library see as important in this, but it takes a special skill set to search for and sort and evaluate open educational resources. There unfortunately is not one nice collection you can easily search, and so the skills that librarians have may not be duplicated on your campus in a different department or in a different person. So this is really an important partnership that libraries can play with other campus stakeholders. So I also wanted to point out some of the major players. There are some big names involved in this open educational resources world or movement or whatever you want to call it. And they kind of, in my mind, fit into some nice categories of there's creators, there's consumers, and there's advocates. And if you recognize some of the logos, at least of the universities, you can see these are universities with probably quite a bit of money or large staffs that can support this sort of research. But one thing that I was curious about, and as initially just a passive observer of what open educational resources are, I didn't see small universities like mine taking part in this as anything more than an advocate. And I hope to show through a little discussion of what we've done here how a small university can take a step into taking part in the consumption of open educational resources and moving towards that creating category. Okay, so at Viterbo, we have what we're calling an open educational resources pilot project. And I think some context is important just to get, if you're not familiar with what Viterbo offers or who we are, we have what we call a Center for Adult Learning. And what it is it's basically a collection of degree completion courses that target adult learners. And they're offered mostly online. So the Center for Adult Learning isn't a college, but it's like a group of people and services that work within the university, with the deans, with faculty, with the other colleges, to design these degree programs and then the courses in the degree programs that specifically meet the needs of an adult learner. So the courses are often accelerated. Instead of 15 weeks, they're 8 weeks. They're online or blended, so they meet both online and face-to-face. And the instructors should be using highly engaging pedagogy and applying the adult learner's experience to the academic content. So the pilot program kind of started out of a couple different things. We have a new president. She is great. There's also been a lot of movement in the upper levels. We have a new vice president of academic affairs coming in a month, I think. And a couple other key cabinet level positions have filled recently or opened and then filled or jostled around. So there's a lot of opportunity for new exploration into new ways of providing our services to students. And the president had an interest in open educational resources. So that definitely helped our cause. But also, through the program review process, several Center for Adult Learning courses were flagged as needing significant course redesign or revision. And so through the president's interest in this and through that need to redesign courses, there is this opportunity to investigate how open educational resources might fit into that. And so what happened is our Assistant Vice President for Academic Affairs recruited 6 faculty along with me, the library representative, and the instructional designer on campus who would be willing to test this. Faculty had to be willing to redesign their courses or already be teaching courses that were in need of that redesign. And so faculty from environmental sciences, finance, accounting, nursing, and religious studies ended up agreeing to this pilot project and committing their fall 2017 or spring 2018 courses to this cause. It helps that we got a stipend from the university, a small fund to fund the faculty work as they work through the summer months where they're not getting paid, since their regular schedule and the academic year is just too busy to take on something like this. So this is kind of how the program or the project was made up. The Assistant Vice President of Academic Affairs kind of oversaw corralling all of us into sharing some goals and meeting and committing. The instructional designer worked to help refine some course learning outcomes. And you can see some of the course spread that the faculty members offered to the project. So we have a range. There's entry-level environmental science, a 100 level, and then a couple of 300 level courses. So we had some challenges with meeting all of the range of needs, but you can also see that they kind of range in the way the courses are offered. Initially, the program, we wanted to target online courses, but the reality was we were open to what we could get. And so if a faculty member teaching a face-to-face class as a nursing was willing to participate, we were happy to work with her. We have 2 environmental science professors working with us. So one will teach a face-to-face section with the OER content, and one will teach an online. All of these courses, however, are in the adult learning programs, and so we'll be primarily working with adult learners. The Nurse 290 can take both adult learners and traditional students, so that'll be a little bit of a weird odd duck there. So in the beginning, our project was very amorphous. It kind of started out of that presidential interest and a lot of movement in the upper levels. But the library and the instructional design departments were once under the director of, under the same director, Gretel Stock-Kupperman, for those of you who are familiar, who was a great advocate on campus for library involvement in core projects and also for open access or OER adoption. So prior to really the project forming and it taking off, we took the temperature of different faculty on campus, and we were finding that there was some resistance or concerns about open access in general and open educational resources kind of more specifically. So some faculty just did not trust open anything. They were very suspicious of the quality. They had heard lots of rumors about open access stuff being of lesser quality, and so we kind of had to work against that misconception in a few areas. Other faculty were concerned about just the sheer number of open educational resources. So if they were already familiar with what OER is, what they're all about, they had already taken a quick look and they had felt too overwhelmed by the task of having to sort through the large number of resources. And some were just concerned about the time commitments to redesign their courses around a new material, whether that's an open educational resource, an open access textbook, or a traditional textbook that students have to buy. So all of that, through some initial formal and informal meetings, helped inform what the pilot project would be and what the roles would be. And so the rough breakdown I have on the screen is kind of what we started with, and they're very broad. And they're also very collaborative in nature. Working with faculty to find OER is what I set out to do. But the reality, as we started to work on the project, I started to find that my philosophy that I love, which is teach them to fish and they'll be able to eat forever, would not work in this case because of issues with time commitments that faculty had, concerns about searching, and just the sheer number of resources to sift through. So far my own experiences, the program or the project has significantly shifted in responsibilities where I, at least the library representative, am taking on a significant amount of the searching and the sifting and evaluating responsibilities, and then working with faculty to review what we have. So in the start of the program, anybody who's familiar with instruction, information literacy instruction, knows you really need to have course learning outcomes defined before you can even start building a course. And we were finding that's the same thing necessary for finding open educational resources for a course. I'm a librarian, a true generalist in a lot of senses of the word, but I studied classics, and so I did not feel comfortable understanding all of the concepts that would need to be in a learning material or in a textbook for these wildly different courses. So before I even started to search for anything, I asked all of the faculty participants to send me anything they could from their course. I needed a syllabus, at least, new course learning outcomes if they were asked to redesign their course, old course learning outcomes if that's all they had, their current textbook and resources, and then we met to discuss any of their issues that they've had with their textbooks or any of their issues that they've had in the course. So I just needed to have a little bit of a firmer ground to stand on before I went searching for managerial finance books. So while I was sifting through all those syllabi and course learning outcomes, the faculty met with the instructional designer to just make sure those course learning outcomes fit the needs of the students coming in and the needs of the program. And so what seemed in the beginning to be a real linear progression of tasks ended up being very messy, depending on who we were working with and what the needs were for that particular course. So the search process is probably the biggest piece that I have in this whole puzzle. And this is really the stage where librarian involvement is essential. There are thousands of resources available, probably a lot more. I'm not good at estimating numbers like that, but they are everywhere in different corners of the internet, and librarians have the ability to sift out and sniff out that stuff and curate a nice collection for faculty to review. And so my own search process was a little sloppy at first. Initially, I just hit all the low-hanging fruit collections. So I focused my search initially in the big OER participants, like the University of Minnesota Open Textbook Library. It's an excellent collection of open educational resources with reviews given by other professors from other universities. BC Campus also has an excellent collection of textbooks. OpenStax, SUNY Open, Lumen Learning, and Washington University has a collection of OER mapped to specific courses offered through universities in Washington. So once I did the quick and easy, added all the resources that made sense to my lists, I then had to start casting a wider net. And I wanted to be thorough in my first search into this stuff, in my first test of using OER for courses. So I kind of opened up my search and I began searching in the directory of open access books and the open access publishing and European networks, or open collections. As for those of you familiar, they are large and great collections of open access books in multiple languages. So most of my searching was keyword searching. There's not a lot of subjects assigned to these open access textbooks. In the directory of open access books there is some, but with my very outside experience working with these disciplines, I didn't feel confident in doing just a subject search. I wanted to catch anything I could. And then after working through those, kind of hit into desperation mode. If I was not satisfied with the low-hanging fruit resources, if I found nothing in the DOAB or open, I then went to any publishers of open access books I could to see if there was anything worth looking at. The Publishers of OA Books is a wiki page offered by Simmons College. It is an excellent resource. It's simply an alphabetical list of publishers who have open access books. And they're not just publishers who only do open access. They are traditional publishers we are familiar with already who also have an open access series or the open access option for authors. And that opens up the question of, do we look into the library collection as an additional resource to support this pilot project? And right now, we're still in the initial stages. The faculty I'm working with are very interested in using something that's 100% open, meets the 5 Rs. We have some concerns about ebooks in the collection, where we have a subscription collection. We also buy individual ebooks. I'm very reluctant to suggest to faculty they redesign a course around a subscription ebook title, especially if that title can easily disappear without a lot of notice. So that kind of remains to be seen how that applies. And so we've focused most of our attention on open access textbooks or open access books. And from there we'll fill the holes with other open access content like video lectures or audio lectures or other modules from other schools. So this is an example of one of the lists I created for one of the courses. This was the managerial finance or corporate finance course. And as I was searching through, I just started to realize that the sheer number was too much for me to easily keep track of in a way that wasn't a nice Excel spreadsheet. And so what I did was I tried to make it useful for a faculty reader. So instead of perfect citations, I added the book title, the publication date, because currency is important for these courses, whether the resource was completely OA, completely open, who the authors are, or and which website, if it was coming from an open educational resources collection or library like the University of Minnesota, and then a link. So these spreadsheets, I created one for each course and shared the spreadsheet so that faculty could add to the list or make comments or remove and help me keep track of the progress and whether any of this stuff meets their needs. So I previously mentioned that one of the things I discovered was that faculty had other time commitments early in the summer. And so I was ending up doing a lot of the searching and carrying a lot of that weight. And so as a non-expert in those areas that I was working with, I was worried that the resources I was choosing weren't meeting or would not meet the needs of the course. And so what I set out to do for a few of the courses was to map the resources that I found for the course, so mapping the resources listed in the Excel spreadsheet with the course learning outcomes. And on the screen you can see a little snapshot of one of the tables I created for the finance class. And it's incomplete because mostly what I wanted to do was justify to the faculty member why there are so many resources on this list, that maybe one textbook won't replace the one that you had before, that perhaps you'll have to use chapters from a couple of resources instead of just one. And so this professor I was working with had a detailed, I think she had 9 overall learning outcomes, and then underneath each learning outcome there were sub-outcomes, sometimes going like A through H. So there was a lot of helpful information, and most importantly a lot of keywords that I could use to search through the open access resources for hits, and then kind of deduce that maybe this book, because they talk about future value of investments in chapter 15, could meet that learning outcome. And so part of this was to help me feel better about what I was doing, but also to help faculty then apply the list of resources that I had given them to what they needed in their course. Many of them were kind of locked into the one-to-one replacement mode where they wanted one OER to replace their one traditional textbook. And so I just wanted to at least give them a method for matching their learning outcomes to the content so they're not getting too little or too much with one book, at least. So right now in the program, we're at a lot of places depending on who you're talking to. One of the faculty members has a goal of teaching with Open Educational Resource in July. I think the start date is like July 16th. So she is much further closer to testing the use of OER in her course than some of the others. Another professor is teaching in October, so she has a little bit of time, a little bit of extra time to review the list of resources and redesign her course. So at this stage, what I've done for faculty participants is I've done one big sweep through the low-hanging fruit collections, the directory of open access books and open, and then that OA list offered by Simmons College for anything that seemed to hit on their course. Next steps are for faculty to review and then get back to me on where the holes are in those resources so I can help either fill their holes with academic journal articles, open access book chapters, video lectures, or whatever. So I think this is a good point to get into some of the practical tips. And I hope that the model that we've used at Viterbo could be helpful for some of you as you consider advocating for OER or taking on an OER project where you work with faculty to adopt an OER for a course. But I think first, if you don't have a lot of discussion on campus about open educational resources, or at least about textbook costs, really advocacy is the first step. And so if you're interested in testing the waters or beginning to advocate for open educational resources, you can start by reaching out to faculty in whatever mode exists on your campus. So if you have regular meetings with a faculty member or a department or a dean, that's a good place to start. If you have a library committee, if you are invited to participate in curriculum design, or if you're a library that offers presentations or workshops for faculty or administrators, those are great places to start beginning the discussion, letting people know that the library could be an important partner in at least helping students, helping to retain students, or helping students get equal access to course materials. Also, campus partnerships are important. Scan your campus. Each campus is unique in what it offers. But an instructional designer, somebody who specializes in educational technology, and maybe the Student Success Office would be good partners to start talking to see what they're aware of, if they would be interested. The Student Success Office would be an excellent partner if you can make the pitch that open educational resources can help with student retention and student achievement. Also, scan for campus leaders, and those can be people with leader titles, like a boss, a president, or people who have clout on campus. Maybe there's a faculty member who speaks up regularly at faculty council about educational technology or about educational issues. And also, don't be afraid to take on the advocacy or information role in the library. A lot of libraries start as an information hub first. There are countless LibGuides that inform their communities all about open educational resources and have excellent lists of resources and tools and articles. That is a great first step. Change can be slow, but starting from something, whether it's just educating yourself and taking on that role of OER advocate, or educating yourself and your colleagues and taking on a library partnership where you advocate for OER and advocate for your involvement in these sorts of projects. And if you're ready to go whole hog and use OER or work with a faculty member to use OER in a course, whether to adopt an existing one or to adapt an existing one, there's a couple things you can do. And I'd suggest a little bit different from what we experienced at Viterbo. Scan the available open educational resources to see what's possible first before contacting faculty. It'll save you a lot of frustration, and it'll also help you talk about the potential with different disciplines or different courses with a little bit more backing what you're saying. At Viterbo, the courses were selected first, and then we sought OER. And so anybody who's searched for open educational resources knows some disciplines have a glut and some have nothing. The other thing, survey faculty. I've heard of at least one school that sent a formal survey to faculty over email, gauging their interests and asking anyone who was interested in working on an OER project to contact the library or a particular person on campus to get started. I put campus partnerships on this slide again because it's really important. Don't go it alone, whether it's a coalition of librarians or even better would be different departments working together. It'll save you a lot of stress with the workload, but it also allows for a greater number of professionals with unique skills to take part and really make something successful happen. Budgeting time is a given. But I think if you be realistic and then add a month to what you think would be realistic, or maybe a semester, that's the most reasonable way to do this. It's one thing to just find a resource that works, but I'm finding working with these faculty members and the instructional designer, it's something completely different for a faculty member to redesign a whole course. That's lectures, that could be assignments, that could be activities or quizzes. It takes a significant amount of time. And incentives help with interest and getting people on campus to commit to a project. At Viterbo, I mentioned we had a small fund offered for faculty to participate so that they could be compensated for their work on the project, so that it's not all pro bono. But also scholarship could be used as an incentive, or publishing. OER integration in a course is a perfect opportunity to study student learning, or at least to study student perceptions about online materials or open materials. And junior faculty or faculty who are keenly interested in the scholarship of teaching and learning or promotion and tenure might be interested in taking part if there's also the promise of scholarship or a publishing opportunity. Publishing can also take the form of publishing an open educational resource, modifying an existing completely open educational resource might be something that a faculty member would be interested in, or writing something new and making it open and available to the academic community. And my last big tip is, and this is for advocacy, OER adoption and integration, and anything really, is use the existing tools. There are a lot of very intelligent and giving people that participate in the open educational resources world, and they have some great advice and some great resources you can use. And one that I've found to be extremely helpful in just understanding open educational resources and even what is available is the OER Google group or OER forum offered by Spark. You can subscribe to it like a listserv and get regular emails and just lurk and scan before you commit to speaking to the group if you want. There are, as I said earlier, countless LibGuides, and if you go to the major players like the University of Minnesota, University of Michigan, SUNY, there will be excellent resources to help build your understanding or help you find open educational resources. Okay, I think that gives enough time for some questions or comments. I'm putting my email up on the screen for those of you who want to contact me after in private, but I'm happy to take questions over chat or over the microphone if Jeff wants to do it that way. I'll defer to what Jeff is interested in.
Thanks, Annie. Thank you so much. That was a great presentation. We had one question come in via chat. Catherine, who I believe is at Marion in Fond du Lac, asked, did you get a membership in any of the OER consortia? Can you talk about that at all?
No, we didn't, but I'm curious to hear if you have any suggestions. This pilot project was kind of a quick and dirty exploration, and so once faculty committed and the key players committed to doing this, it kind of took off and just plowed forward. So I'm happy to hear about different OER consortia. The University of Minnesota, I think, offers grants for schools to write open educational resources or open access textbooks, but for the project at Viterbo, we went in knowing we would be consumers, and we're happy to scan and see what we could take without doing any major commitments.
Great, thanks. Do any of the other participants have any questions or comments that you'd like to share with Annie? Feel free to throw something into the chat window. I myself am really fascinated by this topic. I have certainly been interested in open access materials for a long time, but certainly OER, open educational resources, are something that's a little bit newer to me. So I know that there are a lot of initiatives happening both domestically and globally to try and kind of build some steam and some momentum around this topic. I have been hearing about that a lot. So the things that I've been hearing, WiLSWorld will also share kind of in the through our various web presences and that kind of thing. That was me kind of talking for a minute to see if we could get any other questions to come into the chat window, but I'm not seeing any right now. Again, this is sort of an opportunity to let us know if you had anything else you wanted to add or ask. Feel free to pop it in there. Otherwise, we'll probably wrap up pretty soon here.
Great. Yeah, one thing I'll just add real quick is if you're curious to see kind of the results of this pilot project, we have as a goal, as a group, as part of our funding agreement, to do some sort of scholarship that at least addresses how the process worked for us and whether it's sustainable to continue at a really small university. But there's also hope to study whether, I know in the environmental sciences courses, there was interest in keeping core assignments the same to assess whether students in the OER pilot courses are succeeding and meeting whatever academic standards they set for that course versus the traditional ones. So if you're curious to see how it rolls out, I can share with Jeff or share with you more information.
That's great. Yeah, we'll definitely look forward to seeing that, and that's the kind of thing that we'll be happy to share out broadly through our channels too once you've got it. We did have another question come in. You mentioned that textbook sellers and the library have an understanding that the library doesn't have books. I think that probably means textbooks. Did you have problems with the sellers and the library having OER resources, or the campus having OER resources?
No, at least not yet. The pilot project is small enough now that it's not impacting the bookstore sale on textbooks. And so the textbook has this agreement with the university. We work with Follett, where they have the right to sell our textbooks. But they don't control that exclusive right for a faculty member to decide to use an open resource or no resource. And so as this project develops, in consultation with the Vice President of Academic Affairs and the President, we will cover our bases to make sure we are meeting all of the contracted agreements. But the way that the textbook selling works out at this school at least is faculty must submit textbooks, orders to the bookstore, but students don't only have to get them through the bookstore. Many use Amazon. So it probably depends on who you are contracted out with, or what kind of agreement you have at your university. It's definitely something to be aware of and to confirm. And it was part of our early discussions with the Assistant Vice President of Academic Affairs. And she assured us that this would be an okay pilot project and it doesn't go against what our contract has us committing to. That's a good question, though.
Great, thank you so much. Well, I think we're going to give the last call here. If anyone's got any other questions for Annie or anything else you wanted to say or contribute to the conversation, now is the time. I'll just take a moment to reiterate some of what I said at the beginning of the session here today. I've been recording our session, so we will share that on the WiLS website in the near future. We'll be bringing some other open access and open educational resources materials onto the website in the near future as well, and I think that'll be a perfect place to share both today's recording and some of the additional material that you mentioned that your group would be producing as well, Annie. So with that said, I think I will say thank you again to Annie for a fascinating presentation with us today. I know that everyone's always very busy in their jobs, and so anytime someone's willing to take some time out to share what they're doing with us is always a real boon to the whole community. So thank you again, Annie, and thank you to everyone for attending today's session. Keep your eyes peeled. We have another WiLSWorld Shorts coming in September, I believe. It would have been a good date to have at hand right now, but I think that will be one of our vendor partners who should be talking a little bit about information literacy. Okay, thanks a lot, everyone, and thank you again, Annie.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Jeff.
All right. Bye, everyone. Have a great afternoon and a good weekend.